Hello and welcome to Across Africa, our weekly look at stories from across the continent. Coming up in the show, Somali extremist group Shabaab claimed responsibility for a fatal armed raid on a hotel in Mogadishu. The siege was brought to an end by security forces after a car bomb rammed through the gates and gunmen opened fire. Also, uranium-rich Niger is one of the world's poorest nations. That's led to a rate of youth unemployment that's made it easier for extremist groups to convince jobless young men to sign up to their ideology. And for more than a decade, parts of Rwanda's capital have been sprouting new buildings. Construction sites are popping up everywhere in the rush to meet development goals. But it's a race that's leaving some behind. First, at least a dozen people were killed in an armed raid on a hotel in Mogadishu. Members of Somali Islamist group Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack, which began with a suicide car bomb being rammed through the gates of Daya Hotel.
Suddenly, there was a second explosion. A little earlier, a first car bomb went off. Al-Shabaab militants then attacked a hotel popular with government officials. Some witnesses said they pretended to be rescue teams, told customers to come out and then shot them. Many people were killed. The jihadists were later shot dead by security forces.
More than 51 people were injured in the attack. We've started an investigation.
Al-Shabaab regularly carry out attacks in the capital, Mogadishu. Many journalists were wounded by the second explosion as they had rushed to the scene after the first bomb went off.
We were covering the scene of the blast with other journalists when the second bomb exploded. I saw many people lying on the ground, dead. Others were wounded.
The attack came just before the country's election commission announced that the presidential vote would finally take place on February the 8th. The date has been pushed back many times. Lawmakers will choose the president. A universal suffrage election is only planned in 2020. But observers say the February election should nevertheless be the most democratic voting process in decades. Somalia has not had an effective central government since Siad Barre was toppled in 1991.
Healthcare organizations across Africa were quick to voice concerns this week about US President Donald Trump stopping funding to foreign aid groups that offer women advice on abortion. Known as the Global Gag Policy, it prevents USAID from partnering with services that even discuss the option of termination with their clients. Trump is the latest Republican president to reenact the policy since it was first brought in 1984 under Ronald Reagan. I spoke to Nigeria's country director for family planning NGO, Mary Stopes International, and asked about the impact the return of the policy will have.
The policy is a counterproductive and harmful policy. Sub-Saharan Africa had higher abortion rates after Bush reinstated the gag order. And because essentially it reduces the woman's access to contraception, which of course leads to unintended pregnancies. So this is just going to happen all over again. The USAID funding in Nigeria and its work through MySoap Nigeria has been largely around supporting and strengthening government systems and ability to deliver quality family planning contraceptives, which allows women to space their children rightly and also strengthen their family economy and the health of their family. Now, this work has been largely and hugely important to Nigeria as a country. And with this fund not being available, I wonder what this solves, really. It's just taking away the right of the women to make the choice to a good life.
In Cameroon, protests have continued in parts of the country's two English-speaking regions in the north and southwest. Anger there has been simmering amongst the Anglophone minority who say that they've been marginalised in the Francophone country. And secessionists have kept up general strikes dubbed Operation Dead City in towns like Tico, as our correspondents found out.
This maths lesson, usually for a class of 70, is only 3/4 full. After 2 months of conflict, students have trickled back to class in this English-speaking high school of southwest Cameroon. The few pupils that have come have bravely crossed the picket line despite the strike, or like Junior, who's gone back to school petrified, practically in secret for fear of reprisal.
When I came, I took off the top of my uniform and wore another one. People looked at me in a weird way. I didn't understand why they looked at me like that, but I told myself that if I don't go to school, I'll fail.
Posted at the entrance of the school, plainclothes police officers quietly watch over students threatened in the last few weeks.
Tongo, enter class. We were given soldiers that mostly without uniform. They're around the school from the 4 main points that you get to the school.
Despite the police surveillance in this bilingual school, only about 50 students out of 2,700 came to class, mostly francophones. On the anglophone side, not many showed up, the classrooms are empty, the teachers are absent, and the headmaster disheartened.
I feel so sad because I see a set of children who are being used as victims. I'm a teacher, I'm of the English-speaking part of Cameroon, and therefore I am concerned, and I would love that the issues that were raised should be addressed.
Meanwhile, the streets are deserted in line with the call to action of Operation Dead Cities, a general strike. Shops and stores are closed, like Julius's, who can't take much more of an enduring situation.
As you can see for yourself, not only me, even my own neighbors, all of them are just locked. Everything is ground, no movement of vehicles. You can see everything is just packed. Is disturbing us a lot.
With no resolution in sight, the crisis could worsen. The English-speaking unions have called for further general strikes 3 times a week.
For more than a decade, parts of Rwanda's capital have been turned into construction sites. Buildings are popping up everywhere to meet development goals aimed at turning the nation into a middle-income country. The latest measure, small businesses renting residential properties have been ordered to relocate to commercial buildings ASAP. As our correspondents found out, it's a move that hasn't gone down well.
Brand new buildings dot the horizon, built as part of the city's ambitious urban plan, adopted in 2013. In this shopping centre, store signs are abundant, but the wait is on for businesses to occupy all the available space. The chairman of the board assures us that everything's going well.
Our mission, normally in the best case scenario, was to reach a 70% occupancy rate precisely to meet the commitments we had made. And now, 7 months before the start of our business, we're only at 59%.
Other buildings announce a much lower occupancy rate, sometimes below 30%. At the end of December, the council launched an ultimatum. Businesses renting out residential premises have 3 months to move to these new buildings. The city says it hasn't yielded to pressure from the private sector.
We don't just fill buildings. For example, if a building was built for commercial use, then it will have shops and customers. But if another building was built for residential use, it must be used for residential purposes.
Bars, restaurants, NGOs, small businesses, nearly 1,000 companies are concerned. For many, the news was a heavy blow. The small association helps people with disabilities. Despite owning its premises, it still received the council order to vacate.
We don't have regular income to cover the cost of rent, so we decided to buy a house once and for all to fix the problem of rent. So this letter, this announcement, puts us in a difficult situation because we have no means to pay rent, cheap as it might be.
Zachary Nkundi hopes that the council will reconsider its decision when it comes to small NGOs. Otherwise, he'll have to close up or move far away from Kigali.
Niger is a uranium-rich country, but youth unemployment there is a major problem. It feeds into the growing recruitment rates of jobless young men by extremist groups.
Hassan Soumaila has been unemployed for 2 years. Every day he comes to Niamey's main job centre. But he's yet to find work.
Even when you have a degree, you just wait and wait for a job. There are basically no job offers for young people. It's really hard to find a job.
Niger is uranium-rich, but it's also one of the world's poorest nations. And for several years it has been targeted by two jihadist groups, Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram. These groups sometimes try to recruit Niger's numerous unemployed young men. But another consequence of the jihadist attacks is the boom in the private security industry.
For 2 years after my master's degree, I was unemployed. I tried to do small jobs. I looked for internships, but couldn't find any. Then I found myself here, and after my training, I found a job as a security guard. So I'm slowly getting on my feet.
There are already some 200 private security firms in Niger. Another economic resource for the country are the 610 million euros recently offered by the EU. In exchange, Niger has to curb the number of migrants who try and reach Europe.
And we head to Morocco now, where hipster teens are feeding their need for speed with trusty mopeds. But time and tastes catch up with even the most beloved of classics.
This used motorcycle market in the Moroccan capital, Rabat, looks more like an antique fair. Here you can still find the legendary Peugeot 103 that first hit the road in 1971. Drivers in Morocco need no license for the moped, which was all the rage until the early 2000s. But the vintage charm of the 103 is struggling to keep up with newer models.
Everyone wants to buy new motorbikes. If they buy a used one, they pay $200 and half that in repairs. It's better to pay $400 for a new one because you can't find good mechanics now.
Peugeot stopped producing 103s in Morocco in 2014. The only ones left are old models or cheap Turkish-made copies. Today, Rabat's motor stores are filled with shops selling Chinese-made mopeds.
Nowadays, there aren't any French Peugeots left. There are only Chinese products with four-stroke engines and gears. That's what sells today. They're more modern and more solid than the new Peugeots that come from Turkey.
But longtime 103 enthusiasts have no intention of forsaking La Mob, as it's known, filling the streets of Morocco with their distinctive racket.
Well, that's it for Across Africa this week. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.